You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Hristodoulou.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Hristodoulou, and today we are doing our picks for Super Wild Card Weekend. The season has reset. Only 14 teams remain. We got 6 games on tap this weekend, 2 tomorrow. We got 3 on Sunday, and then a Monday night game as well. So a lot to dive into, a lot to talk about. Make sure you comment down below. Let me know who you guys think comes out winners in the Super Wildcard Weekend. We have a lot of really fun matchups here. We have 3 divisional games, so 3 different games where teams are playing each other for the 3rd time this season. And then the other 3 matchups are all rematches from games we saw within the season already. So rematches, rematches, rematches is the theme for this weekend. And we start things off with the Seattle Seahawks going into San Francisco at 4:30 on Saturday. This is one where I don't think a lot of people are really backing the Seahawks. They're 9-8. They haven't been necessarily great or poor on the road. They're 4-4, so they sat at 500 on the road. This is a game where you look at the 49ers and you think they have to win this game. With how good the team's been playing both offensively and defensively, especially the last 6 weeks or so, things have just really cranked up since Brock Purdy took over at quarterback. A lot of people are buying into the 49ers, and that clearly shows within the betting odds, as it is a -9 in favor of the San Francisco 49ers. Money lines at -475. I really like San Francisco in this game. For me, my biggest concern is just kind of the inconsistency we've gotten from the Seahawks in this back half of the season. There was a really good stretch of games where the defense was on point, the offense was on point, but that's kind of teetered off a little bit. And at this point now, I just don't know how much I can trust Seattle in this game. My only real concern these last 6 games of the year for San Francisco has been that quarterback position. And honestly, at this point, I'm kind of a believer in Brock Purdy. He looked really good through the stretch of games he got to play in so far. And I understand it's the playoffs, it's a whole different beast, but you have the plus of being the number 2 seed. You also have the plus of your game being played within your stadium. So it's about as comfortable as you could ask for this game to be for Brock Purdy. I do think he ultimately ends up being a big deciding factor in this game. If he does kind of crap his pants in the playoffs, I kind of think that ends up being the downfall here. And I'm not going to sit here and completely write off the Seattle Seahawks, because if there's one thing I know about the NFC West, these games are always hotly competitive, and it typically comes down to what feels like a possession or so within that range. The -9 is kind of high for me in favor of the 49ers. I do have them winning in this game, but I have it within 7. I have the 49ers winning 28-21. I think we see a fair amount of scoring, but I do think that the 49ers defense gets to overwhelm Seattle just a little bit too much for them to handle, and ultimately walks away with the victor and coming away with the first win on Super Wildcard Weekend. Now, moving into our second game here, we're looking at the LA Chargers and the Jacksonville Jaguars playing in Jacksonville, 8:15 tomorrow night. Another game that I said, rematch city. That's pretty much the entire theme of Super Wildcard Weekend. Every single game is a rematch. Half of them are divisional matchups. Half are rematches from games already played within the season. And this is one that was completely lopsided on the side of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think it was kind of early and things got a little ugly after that win for Jacksonville, but it was a way of them kind of showing that we are turning things around here. Again, they had to kind of go through a little bit of a rough patch before they really found their footing, but Jacksonville this back half of the season is a team that I can really get behind. Whereas you have the LA Chargers, I feel like they're kind of a little bit of a mixed bag. They dealt with a lot of injuries defensively this year, and they've thankfully gotten healthier as the season goes on. However, you do have some concerns with Mike Williams potentially not playing, and that is something that I'm a little bit worried about, because you want to have your entire skill group of guys ready to go, but you do have Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen still going to be within the fold, so there is plenty to feel good about with the LA Chargers offense. I think for me, the biggest deciding factor in this game is really going to be whose defense steps up the most. Jacksonville's defense has been really good this back half of the season, and especially within the last few weeks, really kind of just clamping down on teams and putting the offense in a good position to be able to put up enough and win games. Hence why they ended up winning an AFC South that I don't think a lot of people saw coming up until maybe the last couple of weeks of the season, as the Titans sort of fell apart. So with that in mind, Defense is going to play a big thing, but my last little piece of just kind of concern goes to the Chargers, and it's going to be that running game. We are now in January football, and while this game is being played in Jacksonville, teams that run the ball effectively typically wind up making it further through the playoffs than the teams that don't. I understand we're in a passing league these days. However, you cannot just overlook the lack of a run game that this team has had. And while I really like Austin Eckler as a player, I think he's a phenomenal guy that does not get the respect he deserves, especially for just the amount of touchdowns and yards from scrimmage he puts up every single year. I really like Jacksonville's running game more than I do the Chargers, and I think that's something that could help lead them to victory, especially considering that the Chargers are 28th in the league in terms of stopping the run in yards per game. So I think that might be what kind of gives the Chargers a little bit of a headache. If they play safe, the game can be close, but I have the Jaguars winning this one 24-21. Little bit of, I would say, an upset here. The Chargers are -1.5 favorites, so if you're somebody that likes to bet the spread, give me the Jaguars at +1.5. I think they get the outright victory and win here. I like them for the W, and that's how I feel going into the second game of this wild card weekend. Now, when we start looking at Sunday's games, we have the Miami Dolphins going into Buffalo. Buffalo is riding a massive wave of momentum right now, and I'm legitimately concerned for how this Dolphins team is going to look in this matchup. The Dolphins come into this game with a long list of questionables, and that includes Teddy Bridgewater, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, and Cedric Wilson on the offensive side of the ball, and then you're looking at guys like Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, it's just questionable. There's nothing to say that these guys can't play, but even if they are playing, are they going to be 100%, and are they going to be as effective as they normally would be if they weren't dealing with whatever it is they're dealing with? Now, it's late in the season. Everyone's kind of dealing with something, but just how injured are all of these guys here? And if Skylar Thompson is leading the way for the Miami Dolphins, that is just not a recipe for success that I think I can get behind, and I'm really worried about how this game shakes out. Couple that with Raheem Mostert being hurt, who is a key piece of that running game over there in Miami, and you can see why the Bills are -13.5 favorites in this game, and the money line is sitting at -900 for the Bills. I say, if there's a bet for anything to look at here, maybe look at the over-under. I could see the Dolphins, especially if things kind of get out of hand, maybe finding some garbage time points. And this is on the idea that like the Buffalo Bills are just completely throttling them. If Buffalo gets somewhere around like 30 some odd points, I could see Miami, scraping together 13 to 17 or so if things are going south and they maybe get a little soft on defense late in the game on Buffalo's end. I kind of like the over for this game. 43.5. It does not seem like a crazy total when you think, okay, if Buffalo's good for like 30 some odd points and you get another 17 or so from the Dolphins, just like the idea of 30 from Buffalo, 17 from Miami. Let's say we get somewhere around those lines. At that point, you're looking at 47, and that 43.5 as an over feels pretty good on that one. But I do like the Bills winning this game. I have them kind of just walking all over the Dolphins, 36-17. The amount of injuries and where these injuries are, you're affecting your two-star pass rushers, you're affecting your receiving core. There's just way too much for me to get behind in Miami. I would love to root for the underdog in this one here, but at this point, with just the status of everybody's health being kind of in question, I can't get behind the Miami Dolphins. Now, another rematch. This is the 4:30 game on Sunday afternoon. We have the Giants taking on the Vikings. This one here is a little bit interesting because the last time these two teams met, game was really close. It was fairly competitive, but ultimately the Giants kind of shot themselves in the foot through penalties and they lost the turnover battle 2-0. I really think that this game comes down to just who protects the ball better and who can kind of make those plays to force the other team into a mistake. Both of these teams, solid when it comes to turnovers. The Giants have a +3 takeaway differential, whereas the Vikings are sitting at +2. And for me, this is kind of a coin flip. It really is. Because, again, the Giants, if they played a cleaner game and they weren't, they didn't have this interception and the fumble, and I think it was like 6 total penalties, maybe 7 that the Giants had that first time they met, there's a real possibility the Giants come away with a victory there. However, The game is in Minnesota. Minnesota is currently, 8-1 at home, and the Giants are only 4-4 in away games. So they're sitting at 50% win rate. The Vikings, when they're at home, have not really struggled aside from one bad loss. So it's hard for me to kind of go against the Vikings in this game here, especially with it being as close as I think it really is. I think whoever protects the quarterback better, because both of these teams were getting sacks the last time they met. The Giants were able to net 4. The Vikings were able to net 3. I think whoever plays a better game in terms of going after the quarterback and disrupting the offense and the way that they move. And if the Vikings can just somewhat clamp down on the running game of the Giants, the passing game over there hasn't been too crazy. I like the Vikings. I think this is a close one. That game is -3 in favor of the Vikings, and that's kind of where I have this game ending up, with the Vikings winning 23-20. I don't think the game is a crazy high-scoring affair. I think it ends up being a little bit closer like the first meeting was as well. I could see the Giants maybe squeaking away a victory here, so if you're somebody who likes to bet the spread, that +3 doesn't really seem too bad, especially if you think the Giants are just going to outright win. But the over-under sitting at 48, that's one that I think might be a little bit high. Like I said, the first time these two teams met, not necessarily the highest point total altogether. I believe it was 27-23. I could see this game maybe being a little bit lower scoring, but ultimately it just really comes down to how clean of a game do both of these offenses play, because they have been prone to making mistakes here and there. Like I said, they're not necessarily the worst, but they're not the greatest at protecting the ball. They're both kind of like middle of the road. But I do like the Vikings, giving them a 23 at 220. Now, Sunday Night Football, another divisional matchup. We're looking at the Baltimore Ravens going into Cincinnati. If Lamar Jackson was playing in this game, this is probably the game of the weekend, because so much would be on the line. Lamar Jackson needing to get another playoff win to kind of solidify his spot as a top dog in the quarterback conversation, I guess you should say. And you have the Cincinnati Bengals. 6-1 at home. They're 12-4 on the season. They were making a run for the number 1 seed at one point, and unfortunately, the whole Damar Hamlin situation kind of knocked that into a tailspin and kind of ruined their opportunity to maybe lock up the 1 seed if things kind of went their way. But for me, it really comes down to how close does this game get, and that really is based off of whether the Ravens are starting Tyler Huntley or if they're starting Anthony Brown. I'll say this, if it's Anthony Brown, I don't want to write a team off like the Ravens. You know, they're 10-7, solid group this year, but Anthony Brown under center, trying to get them a victory in the playoffs against a Bengals team that has been really good offensively and has been very good in the second half of games on defense. And overall, the defense has not been too bad, but they've been banged up. They've been dealing with some injuries in the secondary. Obviously, Chidobe Awuzi's not playing, but it's hard for me to buy into the Ravens if they're starting a third-string quarterback. Now, if Tyler Huntley's playing, that's a little bit of a different story. They could keep the game closer. The Bengals are dealing with injuries on the offensive line. It's been noted that Alex Kappa is not going to be playing this weekend, and they already lost La'el Collins a few weeks ago as well. The offensive line's a little bit in flux there in Cincinnati, so being the Ravens and what they do on defense, they're always very well prepared, very aggressive, and they're good at taking advantage of your weaknesses or maybe just what you're dealing with that week in terms of personnel. I feel this game is closer if it's Tyler Huntley, but ultimately I'm just kind of siding with the Bengals on this one here. The Ravens, again, they've been kind of struggling at this point in the season, minus Lamar Jackson. They're 5-4 in away games, and the Bengals are sitting at 6-1 at home. I'm just feeling Cincy a little bit here, and I'm going to go with the Bengals winning 28-20. This is off the idea that Tyler Huntley ends up playing the game, that I think they can keep it a little bit closer, and if the offensive line issues are a little more prevalent in the game, I could see maybe the Bengals keeping their score a little bit lower and the Ravens maybe being able to take advantage of that. Maybe they get a good timely sack here and there that allows them to win kind of the field positioning game a little bit more, that leads to some more points. And then for the final game of the weekend, we are talking Monday Night Football, a rematch from week number 1's Sunday Night Football game. We have the Cowboys heading over to Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers. The Bucs are +2.5 underdogs at home in this game, but I don't really know how I feel about them being underdogs. Listen, Dallas has been impressive all season long for the most part. However, I am a little bit concerned with some of the things we've seen these last few weeks of the season from Dallas. Whether you want to point blame at Dak Prescott or his receivers for untimely interceptions and miscommunications and tipped balls going into defenders' hands, there has clearly been something off within the offense, and that's my concern there. Whoever you want to point the blame at, that's not the argument I'm trying to have here. I am just pointing out what's clearly been somewhat of an issue. We've seen some pick sixes, we've seen some tipped balls go into defenders' hands. That needs to be cleaned up. You couple that with the fact that the last couple of weeks, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers seem to have kind of found their footing. For at least 6 quarters, it seems like that offense found its rhythm that it's been missing for the bulk majority of the season, minus like a comeback drive here or there, and then in some games where they've played fairly well against lesser opponents. But it feels like there's a little bit of a momentum swing over in Tampa Bay. Now, it's very hard to beat a team twice in a season. I feel like that's something that I talk about a lot on here, and I go against that notion very often. And if you look at the picks I made this week, I have 2 teams that are beating a team twice that they, again, already played earlier in the season. So, I mean, I'm going against the grain here, but I'm just, with how solid Tampa Bay's defense is, and growing up in New England, not a Patriots fan, watching Tom Brady do his thing, and again kind of doing that same thing this season as well in some key spots to at least keep hold of the NFC South divisional title, I'm having a hard time betting against Brady in this game here. For the most part, Dallas has been good. They're not as banged up as they were a few weeks ago, minus, I believe, just Brown in the secondary. For the most part, you're feeling pretty good. I know that there's been this large conversation about like their defensive statistics when they're playing on grass versus like in the dome that they play over in Texas. So whatever that is, I don't know if that's just being overblown. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Obviously, playing on turf is different than playing on grass. We'll have to see if that kind of pops up again and if maybe that rings true for the Dallas Cowboys. But I think I'm going to go with the Buccaneers here. So I do like the upset victory for Tampa Bay here. If you're gambling on an underdog, this feels like a good game to go with the underdog because the underdog boasts a pretty solid team on paper that just hasn't really had the production you'd expect from them. And again, for 6 quarters, these last 2 weeks of the season, Tampa Bay's looked really good on offense. I know that, this last 2 quarters of last week's game, not great for Tampa Bay, but they pulled starters. So what can you expect? When they were on the field that last game, they looked good. I'm going to take Tampa Bay. Little bit of an upset victory here. I don't really know if it is as big of an upset as you might actually think. I mean, they're playing in Tampa Bay as well. So I'm curious what the odds for this game would be had it been in Dallas. But for me, it's just, can the Cowboys correct their offensive issues that they've kind of been dealing with the last few weeks? Is Tampa Bay finally finding that groove that they've been missing for pretty much the entire season? Because if they are, this would be a damn good time to do it. And I just don't really want to bet against Brady, at least not this week. At least not this week. But those are my picks for Super Wildcard Weekend. I'd love to hear what you all think in the comment section down below. Let me know your picks, your choices, who's making it onto the divisional round, who's going home packing, one and done through the playoffs for the 2022 season. That's it for me. Appreciate you all for watching. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.